Here's a Retina IIc from just across the ditch, and this one the shutter doesn't fire, and I think I know the reason why. Watch the action here. That shutter cocking rack is very damaged, so I'll pull it out and we'll have a quick look and see how awful it is. Oh, that's loose. Someone's been in here and it's bent. So I hope that screw hole's not stripped, because that will cause grief. It's very dirty in here. It's like a lot of gritty grey stuff. Not sure what that is. That shutter cocking rack is very short on teeth. I'll just blow some of that rubbish away and you can have a look. Oh. That is exceptionally mutilated. Those teeth don't really look much like teeth anymore. Well, it's going to require one of those, but what about the gear on the centre of the shaft there? Is that any good? There's some bits of rubbish in there, but I don't know whether those teeth are actually damaged. If they are, it'll be all at one point in the travel, and you can get by typically by rotating the gear on the squared shaft so that the damaged tooth never gets in contact with the rack, and that normally is good enough. I'll bring you back once the camera is all stripped and clean and we can really inspect those parts. Often it's hard to tell why the gear should have stripped there, but have a look at this. This screw is actually loose. So that means that the gear can flop around to a certain extent, which means that it wouldn't have been keeping in close contact with the shutter cocking rack, and of course once the load goes on, if the rack can push away from the gear or the gear can push away from the rack, then all the action is carried right on the very tips of the teeth, and as a result it fails fairly promptly. I wouldn't be too surprised if there aren't other problems here, but that was certainly enough all by itself to have caused that shutter cocking rack to fail. These parts I'm just removing to get them into the ultrasonic cleaner there. All pretty gritty in there. It looks like there's a bit of sand or something in here. That certainly wouldn't have helped the situation at all. I've mentioned that there were variations in the shutter release on the 3C type cameras, and here's a Retina IIc, fairly early model. You can see that it has no spring down here to push this piece back up. This piece would only be moved up by the tension of the shutter itself, the shutter release on the camera body itself, that would the shutter would do it. This one's been buggered with. You can probably see that this is not at 90 degrees. Someone's bent that down in an effort to make something perhaps trigger the shutter earlier or something of that nature. I also notice another problem with this. That screw is floating very loose, and its mate. So someone has tried to make this run smoother by leaving the screws loose, I would say. I think this is a result of them bending this. This is bent around the corner, so it's effectively rubbing on that frame. So this camera has certainly been buggered around with by someone. I don't see any problems at the moment that I can't overcome, but time will tell. Yeah, that's quite definitely somewhat other than straight. As you can see here, it heads off in this direction. Oh well, I'll sort it out. Come on, video camera, focus. That's better. As you can see, I've got this back together and straightened up. That's running nice and freely now. You can hear it rattle backwards and forwards as I shake it. That's how they should be. There was no danger it was going to move like that previously. It would just stick. Other things wrong with this. Well, I'd also already identified that this stud, which the film release button runs on, was bent, somewhat out of shape. What else did I discover? Oh, this and the shutter release mechanism. You'll see this is very, very bent. That's supposed to be at 90 degrees, that cross arm. It's not exactly at 90 degrees. So what could have caused that? Well, I would say at a guess that that's been caused by someone poking and prodding and just pushing things they shouldn't have been pushing on, basically. I haven't decided whether that's... I'll just have a quick look in here. How does that sit? Yeah, no doubt in my mind, someone found the shutter wouldn't release, so they just pressed really, 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 really hard on the shutter release until they bent this, pushed it all out of shape. Whether they did that before or after they mutilated this piece, which was bent the other way, I do not know, but I would not be at all surprised. I'm surprised actually, looking at this, that the shutter release lever on the shutter itself isn't bent to match. But there you are, the shutter wouldn't release because it wasn't cocked. It wasn't cocked because the cocking rack was buggered. But someone pushed and pushed and pushed on the shutter release lever in a hope to make the shutter fire. Of course, it was doomed to failure. Anyway, back to the reassembly. So here we have it, our Retina IIc back together and functional. I'm fairly sure I had some footage in between what you've previously seen and now. Probably lots of clever things were said, but unfortunately I formatted that card and any footage I did have is gone. There wouldn't have been much. Possibly there was 1 or 2 points I wanted to make. Nothing important. Really, you've seen all the important stuff to start off with. The shutter cocking rack was absolutely ruined. There were a few bent parts. Basically, the camera was otherwise good. And once it had been completely stripped and serviced, it was great. The shutter is one of the earlier shutters. It has the 10-leaf diaphragm. That was quite sticky with oil, as were the shutter blades. There was no danger that shutter was going to behave itself, even had the cocking rack been present and correct, which of course it wasn't. So there we have it, a nice Retina IIc camera. That one is going back to its owner, and I believe it had been passed down through the family, and they'll be pleased to see it and put a film through it, I would think. Thanks for watching.